What is today Latin America was once many native nations. Spain, Portugal, France, England, the Dutch, and Danish all invaded. They carried out genocide after genocide and enslaved both natives and Africans. After independence, most new governments were still white-dominated, with more genocides against natives in nations like Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. European powers hold on to some territories even today and kept invading to take their colonies back. The United States invaded too, overthrowing or trying to overthrow over 60 governments, the last attempt in the year 2020 in Venezuela. The U.S. also took half of Mexico's land and a tenth of its people, and then Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. There's a long history of many Americans fearing and hating Latinos. Latin America's image and reality is often one of instability, poverty, drug cartels, revolutions, corruption, and refugees. But it did not have to be this way. Latin America could remain all or mostly native nations. I spoke about this in detail in the previous series, What If Natives Won? Poverty, white domination, and foreign invasions could have been stopped, prevented, or limited. The U.S. could have been more Latino culturally, with higher numbers of Latinos. The U.S. could have been less racist, less dominating, or the U.S. could be defeated. Some Latin American nations could even become regional or world powers. There's a huge lack of alternate history about Latin America and Latinos. So much alternate history is Europe-centered, mostly because so much history and history teaching is Europe-centered. This series is dedicated to scenarios, points of departure, and possibilities of Latin American victory within Latin America and a more Latino or less racist American society. My name is Carroll. I'm Associate Professor of History at Northern Virginia Community College. I've written mostly about wars, veterans, human rights, and genocide. My next history book will be Genocide Denial in America, about the 7 genocides against indigenous people that took place in the U.S. that most people were never taught about, don't know, or deny. I've also written some science fiction, mostly alternate history. One story, Timely Saviors, appeared in a short story collection, The Witness Paradox. I'm also, together with Rob Schmidt at Bluecorn Comics, editing and putting out a short story alternate history collection, What If Natives Won? I've also written a sci-fi alternate history book, The Man in Black, the first of a series. After Cuba, no nation in Latin America is more of a boogeyman for many Americans than Venezuela, and for much the same reasons. Venezuela successfully defied America and its imperial ambitions for over 20 years. Its leader, Hugo Chavez, built Latin American alliances, ALBA, the so-called Pink Tide. He successfully urged Bolivia, Ecuador, and Nicaragua to join him in defying the U.S., and already defiant Cuba joined as well. Most of Latin America rejected U.S. and World Bank loans and got loans instead from Venezuela. They kicked out U.S. military bases and just said no to the American drug war. Hugo Chavez was elected 4 times, and contrary to hysterical and false claims, he was fairly elected. Bush's attempts to overthrow him only made him more popular. Chavez was even popular within the U.S. for a time, giving free heating oil to poor communities and Indian reservations. Chavez publicly insulted Bush many times, calling him the devil and an idiot in a speech to the UN, and comparing him to Hitler. For most of his time in office, Chavez was very popular in Venezuela. The Bolivarian Revolution made most Venezuelan lives better off and freer. Unemployment, infant mortality, and especially extreme poverty dropped sharply, and income more than doubled. Venezuela before Chavez was deeply racist, long dominated by a white European ancestry wealthy minority. Bolivarian supporters were overwhelmingly poor, black, native, or mixed race. There were collectives, councils, and co-ops, through which the majority of Venezuelans gained new power and representation and democracy. The opposition, especially in the beginning, was powerful old elites, almost entirely whites, either wealthy or upper middle class. They included almost all the media, and dangerous and well-armed militias who killed dozens of Chavez supporters, cops, and soldiers each election, called guarimberos. Some were well-off white students and sons of the wealthy, but some were just street thugs, often hired. Chavez died in 2013 at age 56 of cancer. His successor was Nicolas Maduro, a union leader. Chavez was far more popular than Maduro, far more charismatic, and far more skilled at outmaneuvering his opponents. Chavez was so popular that the opposition all united, all over a dozen parties. And they still lost, again and again, in part because they were dumb enough to boycott elections and then pretend they lost because of repression. Shortly before Chavez was dying, oil prices dropped sharply. Venezuela's economy was a monoculture, utterly dependent on one product. The problem for Venezuela was not their attempt at socialism. Quite a few socialists and other leftists argued the nation was not socialist at all. It was state capitalism. The problem was the nation was still very dependent on capitalism, the international oil market. Things were made worse by wealthy elites not only boycotting, but fleeing with their capital, or outright sabotaging the economy with strikes and violence. Bush was not the only U.S. president to try overthrowing Chavez. So did Obama. And Trump planned to invade twice. Then he tried to put a puppet into power, Juan Guaido. Finally, American mercenaries tried to kidnap or assassinate Maduro and others. All these coups failed and backfired, making Maduro more popular. The opposition divided and finally negotiated with Maduro, admitting defeat. Then they were defeated again by huge margins in the next election. What if Chavez avoided dying, the funeral shown here never happening? If his cancer was caught sooner and successfully treated? He completes the last term that he was elected. In real life, that term was completed by Maduro. Possibly Chavez is elected one more time, serving until 2019. Because of his greater popularity, skill, and charisma, it is almost certain he will do better than Maduro. But in real life, he only narrowly won re-election in 2012. A defeat in 2018 is very possible, and Bolivarianism may be discredited in elections. For Chavez to win re-election, he needs to avoid the mistakes that Maduro made, and even the mistakes Chavez himself made. Venezuela needs to be successful at building local refining. In real life, that was never invested in, and oil production declined. It needs to diversify the economy, much like Cuba did. In Cuba, what was once a nation completely dependent on sugar exports and Soviet aid, became very successful with tourism and with medicine, trading both their many doctors and pharmaceuticals. Chavez and Venezuela need tourists, and they need an educated population producing something like medicine and doctors, something other than oil. But Chavez faces a hostile America, not just G.W. Bush, not just Trump, but even Obama and almost all Democratic Party leaders, and later on, possibly Biden. When Chavez and Obama met, Chavez tried giving him the famous book, Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. Obama ignored it, and the many Latin American historians in the U.S. urging better relations for Venezuela, just like for Iran. Maduro also faced not just Trump's hostility, but Biden's. Chavez confronting Trump will be far different than Maduro was. Expect a very extended war of the words. Chavez calling Trump accurately crazy, stupid, bigoted, imperialistic. Trump in turn trying his best to insult Chavez, but looking far more foolish, as he did with Kim Jong-un insulted him. Because of that, expect Trump to very possibly be dumb enough to go to war. Expect also the same failed coup attempts by Trump, using the young puppet Juan Guaido and the American mercenaries tied to Trump's own security people. It is even more possible that Trump tries to invade. There is a higher chance that Trump carries it out because he is driven by anger over being repeatedly humiliated publicly by Chavez. Expect the invasion to fail badly, as I discussed in a previous video for What If Natives Won. Expect that Chavez will then be remembered as a national hero for standing up to the U.S., even if the death toll is high, and Trump to be remembered for losing a war, as well as an election and a pandemic. This is the end of the video. Please repost freely, like, quote, and comment. This has been Latin American Victory. Next time we will discuss who could have been the first Latino U.S. president.